welcome to my channel. This is Reddit Scary Stories. Please subscribe if you want to hear more like this. So now that the case is over and I can talk about it freely, I figured I would share my story of the time I got kidnapped. This happened in 2021. I was 20 at the time, and I had just got off work around 11 p.m. and went straight home to get ready to go out and meet my friend at the strip club. He messaged me via Facebook Messenger to hang out and smoke, and I told him that I was meeting a friend and didn't want to hang out, so he offered to drive me to and from the strip club. While around 12:30 a.m., he came to pick me up and said he had to dump some garbage first. He had a couch on the back of the pickup truck bed, which I assumed was the garbage he was talking about. He said he made us margaritas, but I told him I didn't want to drink until I got to my destination. So we ended up just smoking marijuana on the way to dump the couch. It was about a 25 to 30 minute car ride to where he wanted to dump this couch, and by the time we made it to the destination, it was about 1:15 a.m. There was logging road just off to the side of the highway that goes for miles. He pulled all the way down to the end and left the couch there, then got back in the truck and started driving towards the highway. But once we got halfway back to the highway, he stopped and put his truck in park, and then pulled out a pipe and started smoking more marijuana. After taking a hit, he turned his head to me and stared at me for a minute, with a weird smirk on his face. Then all of a sudden, he almost looked like he wanted to jump at me, but stopped himself in the moment with his hands in a motion that he was about to grab me. I got scared at this point and was frozen in shock, not knowing if it was a joke or not. I quickly realized it was not a joke and opened my door like I was about to get out, and he did the same. I closed my door, and he closed his too. We ended up playing door tag, and eventually he got tired of it and got out of the truck and ran to my side. I was in the passenger seat. He opened my door and tried pulling me out by my legs. As I was trying to kick him, I pulled my phone out and called the police. And of course, my Face ID didn't want to work in that moment, and he ended up snatching the phone out of my hands. I kicked him hard enough in the chest and he flew backwards, falling to his back. I grabbed my purse and hopped out the truck and started running towards the highway. I kept looking back to see how far behind me he was, and he gave me a head start before running after me, grabbing me by the back of my shoulders and forcibly throwing me into the ditch. I landed on my stomach with one leg straight out and the other one was bent at a weird angle. He sat on top of my legs and was holding my left hand behind my back. I screamed and begged him to bring me home and that I wouldn't tell anyone. He got upset that I was screaming and tried suffocating me with his other hand while still holding my left hand behind my back. I kept trying to pull his hands off of my face with my right hand because it got to the point where I couldn't breathe. Finally, he let go of my face and I turned my head around to see what he was doing, and to my surprise, I watched him pull zip ties out of his front jean pocket. He zip tied my hands behind my back and then tried forcibly pulling my panties off of me. I had on a skirt and was still laying on my stomach. I remember digging my knees into the ground so he couldn't get them off. He didn't. He got up and started pacing, saying, "It shouldn't have happened this way. Just do what I say." I cried, telling him if he was going to do anything to me, then put me back into the truck, and he did. Not going to go into detail about this part of the story, but what I did notice was he pulled out a really small Ziploc baggie out of his jean pocket and pulled out a condom. He took the condom out of the actual wrapper it came in and put it in a really small Ziploc baggie. I asked him what it was and he said it's for protection. After all that went down, he got back in the truck. Mind you, I'm still tied up, and he drove back to the highway and started driving around. I made up every excuse to get him to take them off of me, and he wouldn't. I asked for a cigarette. I don't even smoke cigarettes. And he lit one, smoked on it a bit, and then held it up to my mouth saying, "I'll hold it for you." At this point, I thought to myself, what can I do to get myself out of this situation? I thought I was going to die. I started saying things like, "You can be my sugar daddy, and I will pay you to take us out to dinner tomorrow. If pussy is all you want from me, you could have just said that." He loved it so much he started saying he would put me on his life insurance policy so when he dies I can get the money. Eventually I asked him again if he would take the zip ties off. They were on so tight it was cutting my circulation. He pulled to the side of the road and pulled out a mini pocket knife from his car keys and cut them off of me. It took a few tries because of how tight they were, and gave me my phone back. I had an Apple Watch on my wrist and asked him for it after noticing it wasn't on my wrist anymore. And he had this surprised look on his face and said, "We need to go back and get it." He turned around and headed back to where all of that just happened at. I got so scared and thought to myself, yep, this is it. I'm going to die tonight, and nobody will know until somebody finds my dead body once we get there. He told me to stay in the truck, and he got out and searched the ditch for my watch. He came back to the truck after 5 minutes and said he couldn't find it, but would be back in the morning to look when it's light outside. We got back on the highway and headed back to town. Once we got into town, he asked me, "What do you want to do now?" I said, "Bring me to my mom's house. I have to work in 4 hours and I'm tired." It was about 4:30 a.m. by this time, and he brought me to my mom's. After getting to my mom's house, I looked up his name on Google, and he was on parole for first-degree murder. He had served 17 and a half years in prison for murdering somebody for their life insurance policy. I'm 22 now, and I'm so thankful I got to see another day. I was subpoenaed to testify against him, and he was found guilty. November 6, 2023, of all the charges. As of now, he hasn't been sentenced yet. When I was a teenager, I was goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup. Even had a pair of combat boots. My friends and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at the local cemetery. We started going as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. That all changed one night. My friend called to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of our other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before, so we were on our own. My friend picked me up and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out, smoking cigs, and BSing about the latest issues she was having with her boyfriend when we noticed that at the top of the hill we were on, about 100 feet away, a bonfire had been lit. You have to understand that this cemetery is about a block off of campus of a major university, and it is not uncommon for college students to go there to party. My friend and I sighed, knowing that we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew that the police would show up because some jerks had decided they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigs and then take off. Just then, the most horrible stench came wafting down the hill from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and covered her mouth. I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head, saying, "I don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave." We get in the car, and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, maybe we should just go up and see what they're doing. My stomach turned and a cold shiver went through my body. My friend must have had the same feeling, because at the same time we both said, "No, we should leave." My friend turned the car on, switched on her headlights, put the car in reverse, and looked over her shoulder before starting to back up. I was still looking up the hill. A figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see a silhouette, but I was sure whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me, and I said, "Go, go, 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 go," getting louder and more panicked with each word. My friend looked back up the hill for a second, and just as the figure took a step towards us, she slammed on the gas and peeled out, going in reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive, and we were out. We didn't say anything for a while until she said, "What the hell were they burning?" I shook my head. I don't know. She dropped me off at home, and I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and went out to the kitchen. My mom was there, drinking her morning coffee, and I joined her. We talked about her job for a bit when she suddenly comes out with, "Did you hear what happened last night?" I shrug and say no. I had just gotten up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from the parking garage. "Oh my God," I say. "Did they find her?" "Yes, but too late," she replies. "Whoever took her had raped and murdered her. They found her this morning up in the cemetery. He had tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire." I froze. My brain was going a mile a minute. The realization slowly creeping up. That's what the smell was. Needless to say, I never hung out at the cemetery at night again. I think back to our decision to leave instead of investigating the fire. That one decision could have changed everything. Dark silhouette in the bonfire. Let's not meet. So yesterday, I was at my sister's house with my mom, watching my son and nephews play in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off of a tree when I remembered an odd encounter I had as a kid. I said, "So weird," out loud, thinking about the encounter. My mom inquired what I was thinking about, so I told her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at the Pinecone Forest, which was what the neighborhood kids called a small patch of trees on the side of the road. I was picking bark off of one of the trees so to pass some time, waiting for my friend Frankie to finish his homework and come out to play. Out of nowhere, it seemed, a guy came up to me. I could smell him before I saw him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke. I was kind of scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a very lazy eye that was cloudy, and his teeth and fingernails were stained yellow. My mom taught me to be nice to people even if they don't look like me, so I faked a smile and said hello. "What are you doing?" he asked me. The smell of his breath was the worst. I'm picking the bark off this tree." "You shouldn't do that. It's like picking off the tree's skin. How would you feel if someone picked off your skin?" he said while lightly pinching my arm with his sharp yellow nails. "I don't know," I replied and took my arm back. Just then, Frankie's mom called for me out the door and told me to come and wait inside. I didn't think anything of the whole thing at the time. When I told my mom about it, she had this look of, I don't know, guilt maybe. She said that it's probably time I know the whole story. She thought I forgot about the whole encounter, so she never brought it up to me. First, you should know that the neighborhood I grew up in was a small, tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and there was no reason for an outsider to come unless they knew someone there. Anyway, here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mom, Sonia, noticed a white van with no windows parked on the side of the road. She didn't recognize it, but figured maybe it was a visitor for a neighbor. Sonia said, or rather told the police, that the van had been there all morning and afternoon. She was kind of keeping an eye on it. She said she had just had a bad feeling. Her house had a huge window in front, facing the Pinecone Forest, and the van was parked next to it. She saw me waiting for Frankie and kept a constant eye on the van while holding the phone just in case. She saw the man exit the back of the van and walk up to me. As soon as she saw him grab my arm and pinch me, she called the cops. That was when she called me into her house. The cops stopped the guy just outside of my neighborhood. In the back of his van were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, and pictures of me taped all over the walls and ceiling. Me at school, at my grandparents' house, at the bank with my mom. Just me everywhere I went. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him. Inside the unit, they found a cabinet full of knives. A lot of knives. Paring knives, a butcher cleaver, a thin flayed knife, a melon baller, and just various knives of all shapes and sizes. There was also a few anatomy books, obstetrical equipment, duct tape, and 10 empty 5-gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients, so it had wrist and ankle straps. and the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. My mom said he was in a high-security mental institution for the criminally insane, last she heard. So that's pretty creepy to me, and I figured I'd share. So this happened years ago, when I was a dumb teen girl who loved walking in the city alone after dark. This took place in Eastern Europe, for context, in a city with a tramway system. On this one night, I sat in a tram station, waiting to catch the last tram home. 3 trams stopped at the station, 2 of which went where I was going. Important info for later. It was around 10 p.m., and as I sat there waiting, lost in thought, I barely registered a man quietly walking up and standing by the shelter. I thought nothing of it, just someone else waiting for the tram, until I started feeling weird. The streets were quiet and dark, and there was no one else in sight, just me and this guy. And I started wondering why he chose to stand this close to me, when he had so much space to avoid dealing with people. I couldn't comprehend anyone wanting to socialize this late at night, given that I was not very social myself. So I glanced at him, trying not to overthink it. He was a bald-headed, beady-eyed giant, tall and built like a bear, big belly and big arms and legs. I was 5'2" and scrawny, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that he was staring right at me, unblinking and expressionless, not even attempting to look away or act embarrassed. No, this guy wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I instantly felt weak and shaky, cold shivers down my spine. This was not normal. I realized quickly that I was not in a good situation. I couldn't miss the last tram. Walking home was out of the question, and my phone was almost dead. I was a shy kid and didn't have what it takes to scare this guy away. I knew that, but I had to at least try. I only managed to utter a small, "Hi," trying my best to startle him out of whatever he was thinking. But my attempt failed in the face of his silent, threatening aura. He kept staring, no sign of intent to reply. He was enjoying this. Feeling the panic rising inside of me, I told myself to stay calm and think rationally. Maybe he didn't hear me. Minutes passed. His stare continued to burn on my skin. There was no tram in sight. Ignoring him didn't work. So I mustered the courage to speak again. This time louder. "What do you want? Stop staring." No answer. He definitely heard me this time. I felt myself start to get angry. I didn't want to let this guy get to me anymore. I didn't want to continue to give him the satisfaction of watching me squirm nervously and pretend that his behavior didn't bother me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to start thinking. I knew what I can't do. I can't fight him off if he makes a move, and there's nothing I can say or do that will get him to stop. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew they weren't good. If I tried to walk away, he would probably follow. I could run, but he would most likely catch up to me before I can tire him out, since his legs were much longer than mine. Even if I managed to somehow lose him, walking home through dark alleys, past the junkies and gypsies that were always prowling about, could land me in an even worse situation. I could pretend to call someone, but he might feel compelled to act much sooner if he felt threatened. So what can I do? The only thing I could realistically be able to do was to try to outsmart him somehow. So I started developing a few plans, depending on which tram shows up, trying to confirm whether he was just amusing himself and actually waiting for a tram too, or popped over for other, more suspicious reasons, and whether I could get any kind of help. I couldn't let him see where I lived, so if he followed me, I'd have to be prepared to employ whatever strategy available, and for that I needed to stay rational and aware of my surroundings. While I was still thinking, the first tram showed up. It was the one I could have taken home, but this one pulled into the depot right in my neighborhood, forcing me to lead him to my home. I hoped he would board it and leave me be, but he didn't. He kept watching me carefully. I let the tram go, desperately hoping it wasn't the last one to head home. He continued to watch, and I sensed that he was quite happy with how things were going. I put up with it for another 15 minutes, trying to focus on another plan of action. I could now pretend that I needed the other tram, the one going to a different area of the city, and just ride to the next station, getting off as soon as possible, so I don't end up too far and miss the tram I need. This tram showed up next. With my heart in my throat, I boarded it and sat down by the door. He got on it too, but sat himself in the back, pretty far from where I was. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking this might still go well. When the tram reached the next station, I got up and out, not looking back and hoping it was all over. But when I stepped on the pavement and watched the tram drive away, I couldn't see him in it. I turned my head slowly and was terrified to see him walking towards me, looking slightly pissed off. He stopped just a few steps away and resumed staring, this time with a clear hint of malice, still in silence. My vision blurred as I fought back tears of despair. He was not going to let me go. The helplessness I felt was unbearable. But I couldn't cry. I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. I had to get home tonight. The prospect of what might happen to me any time now, if I didn't, was becoming too real. My head was full of unanswered questions, regrets, and horrible scenarios. I wanted so badly to not to have to think anymore, to not to have to fight back tears and stay composed. But I knew this would be his cue to enact whatever fucked up plan he had in mind. I couldn't let that happen. Then I saw the final tram approach, the only one I could take now, and got on as quickly as my trembling legs would allow me to. When I was in, bright lights enveloping me, my mind snapped out of its nightmarish spiral of fear and allowed me a moment of clarity. I had 3 stops to figure this out. I sat down at the front and looked at the driver. He was a frail old man, blissfully unaware of my distress. Getting the driver's attention was a no-go. We passed one stop. There was no one else waiting to climb aboard. I turned around, fully expecting to see that the psycho had followed me again. But I did not expect him to be sitting right behind me. He was not taking any chances. He was making sure I won't try anything like last time. I shot him a hateful glare and allowed my anger to overcome my fear. I stood up and purposely walked over to another seat in the middle of the tram car. I wanted to make it clear, I will not put up with this BS any longer. He got up too, and slowly walked up to a spot 2 seats behind me, and diagonally from me, and sat down with the tiniest arrogant grin on his face, already expecting it. I shot up and stood by the middle door instead, determined to keep him on his toes. If I stood right by the door, he won't have any idea which station I plan to get off at. He remained where he was this time, convinced that I was bluffing. After all, this was really the last tram. There was nothing else I could possibly do to escape now. He must have reckoned, so my defiance was just a funny act to him. This was my last chance. I had to take the risk. It had to work. There were 3 doors on the tram, and they all opened and closed at the same time, and stayed open for around 5 seconds before closing again, if no buttons were pressed, or people detected on the threshold. The next stop, the only one left before mine, came into view. The tram slowed to a stop. The doors opened. I made no move. 5 long seconds passed. The door started to close. I bolted out and ran for it, reaching the back door as fast as I could and slamming the button to open it again. My whole body tense with adrenaline. I waited a long, painful second and jumped back in, keeping my head low, holding my breath and crouching behind the nearest seat. I shut my eyes tightly and exhaled slowly, while thanking the gods I didn't believe in for that button working and wishing with all of my might for him to not have seen me before I got back in. As I was waiting to hear his footsteps approaching, I pictured him frantically looking for me. Was he still in the tram, face screwed up in anger, head turning like a fat, ugly meerkat? Or was he catching his breath on the pavement of the last station, mad eyes searching the darkness for me? As the tram continued its loud journey, banging and clanging in sync with my heartbeat, I dared smile to myself, imagining his face when he realized he fucked up. Hand on my chest, I did my best to stealthily look around the corner and found no one looking back. I stood up in excitement and threw myself at the foggy back window. There he was, standing alone and victimless on that slowly fading out of sight station, watching me leave him and his vile plans behind. Giving someone the middle finger never felt so good. I made it home and told no one my story for fear I'd be admonished for my naivete, but I was safe, I was proud of myself, and I learned my lesson. Creepy stranger, I hope the events of that day taught you not to underestimate girls and prevented you becoming a criminal for the rest of your life. Let's never meet again.